It was a hot afternoon in the city, the kind of day when the sun beats down on the pavement, making everything feel heavier. She walked quickly, her bag swinging gently at her side, trying to get to the bus stop before her next appointment. She had a busy day ahead, and she liked to keep a rhythm in her steps, a kind of silent confidence that she was used to carrying with her. Suddenly, she felt the flash of red and blue lights behind her. At first, she thought it was nothing, just another car pulling over for some reason. But then she heard the siren blare, sharp and commanding. 2 police officers stepped out, and she froze for a moment. Her heart pounded, but she tried to stay calm. She had dealt with authority before, and she knew how to keep her composure, even when the situation felt unfair. "Excuse me, ma'am," one officer said, his tone flat but carrying an edge that made her uneasy. "Can you step aside for a moment?" She nodded slowly, her hands relaxed at her sides. "Yes, officer. Is there a problem?" The other officer stepped closer, his eyes scanning her from head to toe, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "We just need to ask you a few questions." "You don't mind, do you?" She shook her head. "Of course not. I'm happy to answer your questions." But there was a tension in the air, one she recognized immediately. This wasn't a routine stop. She could feel the judgment in the officer's gaze, a weight that made her skin crawl. People on the street had started to notice, glancing over as the scene unfolded, some pulling out their phones to record, others just curious about the growing crowd. "What are you doing here?" one officer asked abruptly. "This area isn't really meant for people like you to be walking around." She blinked, surprised by the sharpness of his words. She had heard subtle racism before, but this was different. Bold, open. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm just heading to the bus stop. I have an appointment downtown. I live nearby." The first officer snorted. "Sure, right. You people are always making up stories." Her stomach tightened, but she refused to show fear. She had learned long ago that anger could be dangerous in situations like this, that losing control could escalate everything. "I'm telling the truth. You can check my ID if you like." The second officer laughed, a low mocking sound. "Oh, we will." "Don't worry about that. But you need to understand, sometimes people like you don't belong in certain places." She felt the sting of the words, but she kept her voice calm, steady. "I understand you have rules to follow, but I also have the right to be here. I'm not breaking any law." By now, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the tension. Some faces showed concern, others curiosity. Phones were raised, recording silently. She noticed a young man in a bright red hoodie standing nearby, watching the officers carefully, ready to step in if necessary. She felt a small sense of reassurance knowing that there were witnesses, but she didn't want to rely on that. She wanted to handle this herself. The first officer leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You better watch yourself. You don't want to make this harder on yourself." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not doing anything wrong. I just want to continue my day without trouble." The second officer rolled his eyes. "Right. Trouble seems to follow people like you no matter what." Her fists clenched subtly at her sides, but she kept her posture open, her voice calm. "I understand that you have a job to do, but I would appreciate being treated with respect. I am a person, just like anyone else here." A few people in the crowd nodded or murmured in agreement, but the officers didn't seem to notice. Their focus was entirely on her, their tone dripping with disdain. She felt the weight of the situation pressing down, but she refused to back down. She had faced judgment before, and she had always emerged stronger when she stayed composed. The first officer stepped back, muttering under his breath, clearly annoyed. The second officer continued to scrutinize her, making notes on a small pad. She watched him carefully, noting every movement, every word. She realized she needed to stay smart, to think a few steps ahead. If she showed weakness, the situation could spiral out of control. "You know," the first officer said, louder this time, "we could take you in for questioning, see if you really belong here." Her heart raced, but she didn't let it show. She straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and said, "I haven't done anything illegal. I would prefer to resolve this peacefully." The officer's smirk faltered slightly. He seemed surprised that she wasn't intimidated. The second officer frowned, flipping through his pad as if searching for a reason to escalate. She noticed a few people in the crowd whispering to each other, some shaking their heads at the behavior of the officers. She felt a small surge of determination. She could not allow herself to be diminished in front of everyone. She had to remain in control. She began to ask her own questions, politely but firmly. May I ask why I was stopped? Was I breaking any law or regulation? The officers hesitated, exchanging glances. The first officer finally said, "You fit a description." That's all. She knew that was a weak excuse, a common tactic used to justify harassment. But she stayed calm. "I see. Can you please give me a description of the person you are looking for? I want to cooperate fully." The officers looked annoyed, as if her insistence on facts was an inconvenience. The crowd murmured in approval at her composed approach. She could feel the energy shifting slightly. People began to realize that she was standing her ground without aggression, showing strength in the face of injustice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the first officer muttered, "Fine, we're done here. But be careful where you walk." She didn't respond immediately. She waited until they stepped back and began to return to their car. Then she let out a slow breath, feeling the tension in her body ease slightly. She looked around at the crowd, some of whom gave her supportive nods. She knew this encounter wasn't over, not completely, but she had handled the first stage with dignity. As the officers drove away, she pulled out her phone and started recording notes for herself, documenting everything that had happened. She knew the importance of keeping a clear record, not just for herself but for the broader message this incident could carry. Her hands were steady now, her mind focused. She felt a quiet sense of empowerment growing inside her. This was a moment that could have been humiliating, but she had transformed it into an opportunity to assert her presence and rights. The bus she had been trying to catch was still a few blocks away, and she began walking toward it, keeping her head high. She felt a mixture of relief and resolve. Relief that the immediate danger had passed, and resolve that she would not let this experience diminish her. She had faced discrimination before, but each time she rose with more strength, more awareness, and more power to speak out. By the time she reached the bus stop, she had made a decision. She would share her experience not for sympathy, but to shed light on the truth of what happens to people like her every day. She would use her voice, her story, and her calm assertiveness to make a difference. The day had started like any other, but it had already shown her the importance of courage, composure, and self-respect in the face of injustice. She stepped onto the bus, her mind busy but her spirit unbroken. She looked out the window as the city moved past, people rushing, cars honking, life going on. And she knew that despite the humiliation she had faced, she had discovered something powerful within herself. The ability to remain strong, dignified and unshakable, no matter how the world tried to treat her. The next morning she woke with a lingering tension in her chest. Even after a full night's sleep, the memory of yesterday's encounter with the officers pressed heavily on her mind. She tried to shake it off as she prepared for her day, pouring coffee into a mug and letting the warmth seep into her hands. The sunlight streaming through the kitchen window highlighted the quiet moments of the city waking up outside. Birds chirped, cars honked, and life moved on as if nothing had happened. Yet she knew her life felt a little heavier from the previous day. She dressed in her usual way, careful, practical, confident. Every movement was deliberate, as though reminding herself that she still had control over her day. The events from yesterday ran through her mind in fragments. Officers' words, their smirks, the feeling of being singled out for something she hadn't done. She recalled the way the crowd had watched silently, some shocked, some supportive, some indifferent. Their eyes had been on her, yet she had managed to stay composed. That small victory gave her a measure of strength, but it also reminded her that the world could be cruel in the most public ways. As she stepped outside, the city greeted her with its usual chaotic energy. People rushed past in every direction, each absorbed in their own lives. She walked steadily, her steps rhythmic, mind alert. She had decided that today, she would not let fear dictate her actions. Yesterday had shown her that calm, knowledge, and dignity could shield her against humiliation, and she intended to use that insight fully. Halfway to her first meeting, she noticed two officers at a nearby corner. Her stomach tightened and a small wave of unease passed through her. She reminded herself to breathe. Fear could cloud judgment, but awareness could empower. She adjusted her bag over her shoulder, holding herself taller, exuding confidence in every step. The officers watched her for a moment before moving on, and she felt a quiet satisfaction that she had not reacted out of panic or intimidation. She was learning how to claim space for herself, even in a world that often sought to deny it. Arriving at a small cafe, she ordered her usual drink, taking a seat near the window. People around her were chatting, reading, or working on laptops, creating a warm hum of everyday life. She opened her notebook, jotting down thoughts and reflections from yesterday. Her handwriting was careful, each sentence a record of her experience. She wanted clarity, a way to process the emotions without letting them control her. The pages filled quickly with details, the officers' questions, the mocking tones, the way the crowd had reacted. Writing it down gave her a sense of structure and purpose. She realized that documenting the experience was a way to regain agency over what had happened. As she sipped her drink, she overheard snippets of conversations from nearby tables. Words like power, rights, and justice floated in the air. She smiled slightly, recognizing that the world was full of stories like hers, even if they often went unnoticed. Her mind wandered to the broader implications of what had occurred, the systemic challenges, the everyday encounters that shaped lives without recognition. It was a heavy thought, but it did not make her shrink. It made her more determined to navigate the world with awareness and courage. After finishing her coffee, she walked to her next destination, a community center where she volunteered on weekends. As she entered, familiar faces greeted her warmly. Their smiles reminded her that despite the harshness outside, there were pockets of support and solidarity. She shared a brief version of her encounter with a trusted friend, keeping her voice calm, her expression steady. Her friend listened attentively, offering reassurance but also challenging her to think about the lessons and opportunities within the experience. They discussed strategies for safety, visibility, and advocacy, turning yesterday's humiliation into a learning experience that could benefit others. She spent the afternoon engaged with the community center, helping organize events and providing support to those in need. Each interaction grounded her, reminding her that she was more than the negative encounter she had faced. She noticed a shift within herself. What had begun as tension and fear was transforming into quiet determination. The officer's words had stung, but they could not define her, nor could they diminish the value of her actions, her integrity, or her presence. Later, while walking home, she reflected on the day. The city was alive with energy, but she saw it differently now. She noticed faces, expressions, and interactions that she might have overlooked before. She understood more clearly how moments of judgment and misunderstanding could ripple through a day, affecting countless people, and she realized that her response, calm, composed, and deliberate, was a form of power in itself. By not allowing anger or fear to dominate, she had maintained control, even in a situation designed to unsettle her. That evening, she sat by the window, the city lights twinkling like stars fallen to earth. She thought about the officers, the crowd, and the countless other individuals who had faced similar encounters. Her mind was a whirl of reflection, planning, and quiet resolve. She considered the importance of sharing stories, of amplifying voices that often went unheard. She made notes about what she could do next, writing articles, speaking to community groups, or simply being visible as someone who refused to be diminished. Her reflection was interrupted by a notification on her phone. It was a message from a local community organizer, someone she had met through her volunteer work. They had heard about the encounter and wanted to meet to discuss ways to address similar issues. Her heart lifted slightly, knowing that her experience could contribute to a broader conversation and create opportunities for change. She replied promptly, agreeing to meet, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. As the night deepened, she prepared for bed with a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. The events of the past day and the possibilities of the future swirled together, creating a tapestry of awareness and empowerment. She knew that tomorrow would bring challenges, perhaps even reminders of yesterday, but she also understood that her strength was growing, rooted in knowledge, composure, and courage. Before closing her eyes, she revisited the thoughts she had written in her notebook. Each word, each detail was a testament to her resilience. She understood that her encounter with the officers was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger reality that many faced daily. Yet she also recognized that every small act of dignity, every refusal to be intimidated, could ripple outward, inspiring others and asserting the presence of those who had long been marginalized. Sleep came slowly, her mind active with plans and reflections. She dreamed not of fear, but of strength, of standing tall, of speaking clearly, of reclaiming space in a world that often tried to take it away. In the quiet of the night, she felt the power within herself beginning to rise, a subtle but undeniable force that would guide her in the days to come. and as she drifted into slumber, she knew that humiliation could be turned into courage, that oppression could be met with awareness, and that even in the face of injustice, her voice, her dignity, and her true power could never be taken from her. The morning light streamed through the blinds, casting stripes of gold across the room. She sat on the edge of her bed, stretching her arms slowly, feeling the muscles loosen from the tension of the last 2 days. The encounter with the officers replayed in her mind again, but this time it felt different. Instead of anger or fear, she felt a quiet determination building within her. She knew that she had faced humiliation, but she also knew that she had the ability to turn the situation into something meaningful. After a quick breakfast, she sat at her desk opening her notebook and reviewing her notes from the previous days. Every detail mattered: the officers' words, their body language, the reactions of the crowd, and her own responses. She thought about how she could use this knowledge to prepare herself for the future. It wasn't just about surviving these encounters. It was about understanding them, documenting them, and using them as a tool to empower herself and others. She decided to take a walk through her neighborhood, a place she knew well and where she felt grounded. The streets were busy with morning traffic, people hurrying to work, vendors setting up stands, and children walking to school. As she moved, she kept her head high, her steps deliberate, aware of the world around her. Every glance, every interaction was a small lesson. She noticed a group of men chatting on a corner, some watching her as she passed. She didn't flinch. Instead, she acknowledged their presence with a polite nod and continued on her way. Control was in the details, in her ability to remain calm and deliberate. When she reached a small park, she found a bench and sat down. She took out her phone and began recording her thoughts. Speaking aloud helped her process the emotions she had tucked away. She explained everything that had happened in her own words, describing the officers' attitudes, the public's reactions, and how she had felt in each moment. She spoke with clarity and precision, aware that these recordings might serve as evidence if she needed them later. More importantly, they were a way to reclaim her voice, to assert that she had not been silent or powerless. After a while, she noticed a young woman approaching, carrying a backpack and a sketchbook. The woman smiled nervously and asked if she could sit on the bench. She nodded, making space. The woman began to sketch, occasionally glancing at her as if trying to capture more than just the scene but also the energy of the moment. They struck up a conversation, and the woman shared that she was studying social justice and had been following local incidents of discrimination in the city. She expressed admiration for the woman's composure during her encounter with the officers, explaining how it had inspired her own research. This conversation sparked something inside her. She realized that her experience wasn't isolated. Others were noticing, learning, and being motivated by the courage she had shown. The humiliation she had endured could now serve a larger purpose. She discussed with the young woman the importance of standing firm, documenting events, and finding allies. They shared ideas about community workshops, social media campaigns, and writing articles that could educate others. She felt energized by the potential impact of turning a negative experience into a source of knowledge and empowerment. Leaving the park, she felt a renewed sense of focus. She decided to visit a local library, a place that had always been a sanctuary for her. Inside, the quiet hum of activity provided a sense of calm, a space where she could think and plan without distraction. She researched local laws, rights for citizens, and procedures for reporting misconduct. She wanted to arm herself with knowledge, knowing that understanding the system was one of the most powerful ways to protect herself and help others. Each page she turned, each article she read strengthened her sense of preparedness. Later in the day, she attended a community meeting about neighborhood safety and policing. She listened carefully, taking notes, and when appropriate, shared her own experience. Her words were measured, composed, and clear. She described the encounter with the officers without exaggeration, focusing on facts, emotions, and the lessons she had learned. The audience responded with thoughtful nods and questions. Some shared their own experiences, and she realized she was part of a larger network of people striving for understanding, accountability, and justice. After the meeting, a small group approached her, asking for advice on documenting their encounters with law enforcement and advocating for their rights. She explained the importance of keeping detailed notes, staying calm, and using technology responsibly. She emphasized that dignity and composure were powerful tools, and that no one should allow humiliation to define them. They listened intently, taking in her advice as someone who had lived the experience and emerged stronger. Walking home, she felt a sense of accomplishment. The day had been long but productive. She had connected with people, shared her story, and contributed to a broader conversation about fairness, dignity, and empowerment. She realized that while the officer's actions had been designed to intimidate, her response had created a ripple effect that could influence others in positive ways. The humiliation she had endured was no longer a source of shame. It was a catalyst for awareness, understanding, and action. As evening approached, she returned home and reflected on the day's events. She thought about how her response had shifted the balance of power even slightly. The officer's actions could not erase her dignity or her knowledge. She had discovered that true power was not in aggression or authority, but in the ability to stay calm, deliberate, and informed. This understanding gave her a quiet confidence that she could carry forward. She sat at her desk, reviewing her notes and recordings, considering the next steps. There were opportunities to share her story more widely, to connect with journalists, activists, and organizations dedicated to justice. She made a list of possibilities, thinking strategically about how to maximize impact without putting herself at unnecessary risk. She felt a growing sense of purpose, knowing that her experience could be a guide and inspiration for others. Before bed, she walked to her window and looked out over the city. Lights flickered in buildings, cars moved steadily along streets, and people continued with their lives. Amid all of this, she felt a quiet determination burning within her. The officer's attempt to humiliate her had not succeeded. Instead, it had awakened a deeper understanding of her own strength and the influence of calm, deliberate action. She knew that tomorrow would bring more challenges, perhaps reminders of what had happened, but she was ready to face them with courage, dignity, and awareness. As she drifted off to sleep, her mind replayed the day's lessons and victories. She dreamed not of fear but of control, understanding, and empowerment. She envisioned herself sharing knowledge, guiding others, and standing firm in the face of injustice. The humiliation that had once threatened to break her spirit had transformed into a tool of strength. She felt the rise of her own true power, steady and undeniable, guiding her steps into the future. The next day, she woke with a renewed sense of purpose. Yesterday's discussions, research, and reflections had ignited something inside her, a determination to not only protect herself but to use her experience to bring awareness and inspire change. She moved through her morning routine with clarity, her actions deliberate, every detail conscious. There was no lingering fear, only focus and resolve. She decided to take her story beyond private notes and conversations. Sitting at her desk, she began to outline a plan for sharing her experience with a wider audience. She wanted to reach people who might be facing similar challenges, who might feel powerless in the face of discrimination. The first step was documentation, and she had already done the work. Her notes were thorough, her recordings clear, and her reflections honest. This foundation gave her confidence that her story could be told effectively and responsibly. After breakfast, she walked through the streets she knew so well, feeling a sense of ownership over her space. The city buzzed with life, but she moved through it with calm awareness, her senses alert but her demeanor relaxed. As she passed familiar corners, she noticed the subtle interactions of daily life, people greeting each other, children laughing, vendors calling out their offerings. Amidst the normal rhythm, she reflected on the contrast of yesterday's incident and how her response had shaped her sense of agency. She arrived at a local community center, where she had scheduled a meeting with an organizer who specialized in civil rights education. The meeting began with introductions but quickly shifted to the substance of her experience. She spoke calmly and confidently, recounting the encounter with the officers and the emotions it had provoked. She described the humiliation, the tension, and the public scrutiny, but she emphasized how she had managed to maintain composure and assert her rights. The organizer listened intently, nodding and taking notes. "Your approach is remarkable," they said. "You transformed a negative situation into a learning opportunity, and that is powerful. Have you considered documenting your experience in a way that could reach even more people?" She nodded. "Yes, I want to share the story responsibly, to educate and empower, not to incite anger or resentment. There are lessons here that people need to hear, especially about remaining composed and aware in challenging situations." They discussed options, From community workshops to articles and social media campaigns, she felt a surge of energy as possibilities unfolded. Each method could reach different audiences, and she was determined to ensure that the story was told in a way that respected both the truth and the people involved. The conversation also explored the importance of privacy and safety, especially considering the public nature of her encounter and the potential backlash from sharing such a story. After the meeting, she spent the afternoon preparing materials. She wrote outlines, drafted articles, and practiced speaking aloud to herself. She considered how to convey the emotions and lessons without allowing anger to overshadow the core message. She practiced speaking with calm authority, imagining the audience, anticipating questions, and crafting responses that would be both clear and empowering. Every word mattered, every pause, every gesture. She realized that the way she presented herself could be as influential as the story itself. Later, she attended a small gathering at a local library, where community members shared experiences with law enforcement and discrimination. She listened carefully, noting patterns and similarities in the stories. When it was her turn to speak, she described her experience with the officers, highlighting both the challenges and the strategies she had used to maintain control. The audience responded with attentive nods, thoughtful questions, and words of support. She saw that her story could resonate with others not as a tale of victimhood, but as a guide for empowerment and resilience. After the meeting, a few attendees approached her privately, expressing gratitude and asking for advice on how to handle similar encounters. She shared practical tips, documenting everything, staying calm, knowing rights, and using technology responsibly. She emphasized that dignity and composure were powerful tools, and that humiliation could be transformed into awareness and strength. Their gratitude reinforced her sense of purpose and gave her the courage to take her story further. Walking home, she felt a renewed sense of power. The city around her continued its rhythm, but she saw it differently now. She recognized opportunities to influence, educate, and inspire. Each step she took felt deliberate, a small act of reclaiming space and asserting presence. She thought about the officers, the crowd, and the countless people who had witnessed or heard about such encounters. Her resolve solidified. This experience, once intended to belittle her, would become a source of empowerment and social awareness. At home, she continued working late into the evening. She refined her articles, ensuring clarity, accuracy, and impact. She drafted messages for community forums and social media, carefully considering tone, language, and audience. Every detail mattered, from sentence structure to emphasis, because she wanted the message to be received as intended: thoughtful, informative, and empowering. She reminded herself that sharing the story was not about revenge or anger, but about transforming experience into awareness and action. She paused for a moment, reflecting on how far she had come since the initial encounter. The humiliation, fear, and anger had been intense, but they had not defeated her. Instead, they had become catalysts for growth, awareness, and leadership. She had discovered that true power lay not in retaliation, but in knowledge, composure, and strategic action. She had taken a moment of public humiliation and turned it into a platform for education, empowerment, and positive influence. Late into the night, she sat by her window, looking out over the city lights. She thought about the impact her story could have, not just for herself but for countless others who might face similar situations. She envisioned workshops, discussions, articles, and conversations that could spread awareness and foster understanding. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, but also a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she could turn a negative experience into something meaningful and transformative. As she prepared for bed, she reflected on the lessons of the day. The officers' actions had attempted to humiliate her, but they had inadvertently shown her her own strength. Her true power was emerging, not through aggression or authority, but through calm, deliberate, and informed action. She felt a growing confidence in her ability to navigate future challenges, to assert her rights, and to inspire others to do the same. Before sleep took her, she whispered to herself, a quiet affirmation of strength. She was more than the judgments of others, more than the moments of fear, more than the humiliation imposed upon her. She was capable, resilient, and empowered, and she knew that as long as she carried her dignity, awareness, and strategic thinking, her true power could never be taken away. The night embraced her with quiet stillness, and for the first time since the encounter, she felt a deep and unwavering sense of inner strength, ready to face whatever the world might present next.